Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is the Paradise Garden, and the planting here is based around one dominant plant, a matrix plant, which is a grass called Stipa tenuissima. And this is, if you like, the ground story spread across all four borders through which the more dramatic plants grow. And that's the Tulip acuminata in spring, we've had cornflowers, there's Tulbaghia. And now, of course, a brilliant display of this fabulous Verbena bonariensis. But the Stipa is in a little bit of trouble because Stipas of all the grasses like good drainage. And they're perfect for growing on sandy soil or chalk. But on this rich Herefordshire loam, they grow too lush. And then what happens, as the flower heads form, it gets too long and the weight of it topples it over. And not only does that spoil the rhythm of the planting, but when it rains, it gets sodden and then suppresses the plants around it. So I simply cut about 3/4 of the way down, pull out with my fingers any of the dead grass, and the idea being that not only will all the plants around them then have more light and air and not be suppressed, but also the grasses will do better. It seems very dramatic, but actually I think it's the best way of treating this particular garden in this particular location. If you live on a much drier site, you probably won't have to cut them back at all. Now, coming up on today's programme, Arit visits a garden with sustainability at its roots.
Is it time to think about how we can make the most of the natural resources that we already have, and then whilst gardening, ensure that we have the least impact on the environment?
We pay a visit to a fragrance-filled garden in Dorset that's packed entirely with plants grown for their glorious and heady scent.
If you've got the option of having a plant that not only looks good, flowers beautifully, and smells good at the same time, why wouldn't you go for it?
And I will be planting cabbages, ready for... Come on. The Jewel Garden is really hitting its summer stride now. It always gets better as summer progresses. And the whole feel of the place is one of opulence. But it is a continuing process of adjustment, improvement, replacement. And one of the plants that I love to use and wish I had more of are heleniums, because they bring to late summer and even early autumn an incredible range of marmalade oranges and browns and sort of ruby reds that are dusky and intense, as well as some bright yellows. But to be honest, I've never had any great success in the Jewel Garden with them. So I want to crack the secret of getting really good heleniums here. Now I'm going to plant a variety called Chipperfield Orange. And I've chosen this partly for the orange colour, but also because it's a particularly tall one. A lot of modern heleniums are quite small, but I like them right up here, competing with everything else in the garden, good, strong plants to best show off their strong colours. And I've got a gap beneath the purple hazel, give them rich soil. I have been mulching this for years, the soil is good anyway, so that's a good starting point. Now I've got 3 plants for a reason, partly to make a nice big display, but also because I want to do a bit of an experiment. The first one, I'm going to plant in the ground, hope it flowers, and leave it. The second one, I plan to cut back quite hard immediately after flowering, with the idea that the energy will go into producing stronger roots rather than more flowers. And if that works and gets a stronger plant, then it's worth the loss of some flowering later in the year. So we're going to put that there, next to it. And the third plant in the trio, I plan to lift. I will dig this one up, put it in the pot, and make sure that it doesn't dry out too much over winter, and then replant it next spring. This is about as late as you can safely plant Helenium, because the later you plant them in the year, the more risk that they won't survive through the winter. So we'll keep them well watered, and hopefully I will work out which is best for me and here in the Jewel Garden, and in a few years' time, Heleniums will be growing happily and strongly right throughout the Jewel Garden, adding that fabulous rich range of colours to the late summer mix. Now, as far as I'm aware, Heleniums don't have any discernible fragrance, and they're none the worse for that. But for some people, scent is a really important factor in choosing any plant. But at Kynaston Mill, in Blandford Forum, in Dorset, it's more than key. It is the single most important aspect of the entire garden.
I'm Johnny Bass, and I am the head gardener here. I first came here as a visitor, and it struck me as being fascinating. This garden as a whole is entirely based on scent. To trial plants in their specific scent groups so that we can harvest that scent and distill it into perfumery-based products. The collection gardens are set out in the various groups of scent that you might get, so florally sort of scents and earthy, woody sort of scents and some spicy scents. We are displaying a whole variety of plants here that people should grow at home. You should grow it in your own garden. If you've got the option of having a plant that not only looks good, flowers beautifully and smells good at the same time, why wouldn't you go for it? The fascinating thing about plants and scent is that different parts of the flower will produce a different compound of scent. So some plants you get the scent from the flowers, some plants you get the scent from the foliage, and others come from the root. We are here in the Padua garden, and this garden is based entirely around sweet floral scents. We have roses, old-fashioned and new, peonies, sweet peas. It's one of those places where you walk around and every corner you get a slightly different scent to the one before. Scent in plants is broadly on two spectrums. Either there as an attractant or as a deterrent. Floral scents is more often than not there as an attractant to pollinators so that the next generation of that plant can be seeded and grown. We are here with damask roses. This is Ispahan. Fabulous rose to grow in your garden. Damask roses have been grown for centuries to get the scent out of the petals. They're the ones that have been used historically for rose water, rose oils, soaps. A lot of people have a hard and fast rule in their head that you should deadhead roses in order to get a second flush of flowers. Now, on a once flowering rose like this, there's no point in doing that because you won't get a second flush of flowers. What we tend to do is just dust off the spent blooms so that you get a display of hips come the autumn and the winter. When they're fully set and they start to drop off, it's a brilliant food source for songbirds and things in the garden after that. I like these roses in particular because you get such a strong scent in one big hit. It's a bit of an insider tip. Most people never appreciate this. But on the very, very young foliage, if you give it a rub and then a sniff, it smells like fruit. It's amazing. I would encourage you to do it. If you're walking past, give it a squeeze. So the scent from plants, particularly from flowers, is made up of essentially a string of carbon-based molecules, but they're very small and very light. And that's how you end up interpreting that scent through your nose. They're so light that they can't be held within the flower, and they end up in the air. In foliage, there is a whole variety of plants that the scent that comes from the foliage is an evolutionary attack by the plant so that they don't get eaten and they survive. Pelargonium graveolens is a fabulous garden plant, and the Pelargonium family in general. They often get called bedding geraniums. They have wonderfully scented foliage. You can get ones that smell like tin peaches, some that smell like lemons, apples and nutmeg and all sorts. It's wonderful. They're a great plant to have in your garden or in a pot, if that's what you fancy. This lovely fella here is the rock rose, Cistus ledantha. It's absolutely stunning when in flower. The really interesting thing about this in your garden is the scent. You might be able to see all of this sticky gum that comes out of the foliage, and it smells absolutely gorgeous. Very masculine, sort of deep, musky, nutty smell. And traditionally, what they would do was run goats, herds of goats, through the plantations, and the gum draws off of the foliage, sticks to the hair of the goats. It's then combed out and taken on for production. Despite being from the Mediterranean, grows very well in our climate. So if you're looking for something a bit interesting, not your run-of-the-mill, perfect selection. This is a grand stalwart of our garden, blue hyssop. We have it in rivers all the way through the garden. It's a very good alternative to lavender. It attracts bees and butterflies, insects and pollinators like there's no tomorrow. You can butcher these fairly well. They're extremely frost-hardy, perennial, very tough. And I think if you have only got a limited space, you can grow one of these in a pot. It smells heavenly, but it's not something that gives off its scent individually. You have to get up and you have to really get in there, give it a shake, give it a smell. We grow quite a collection of citrus here. They're a lot hardier than people give them credit for. Most of the citrus are generally hardy to sort of 4 or 5 degrees. They would require covering for frost in the winter, but they grow well in pots. The foliage, most people would never realise, is the foliage is also fabulously scented. Just crunching up your fingers, you get this amazing scent. In our collection, we have quite a large specimen of Buddha's hand citrus, and it's fabulous. What a brilliant thing to grow in your garden, purely for the interest of the fruit, if nothing else. I thoroughly believe that if people are able to have a plant, if you've only got one for a plant, have a plant that smells nice. It allows your mind to relax and to drift, and it brings another level of pleasure. It's wonderful. It is wonderful.
Watching the pleasure that Johnny was getting from all those different fragrances, I'm afraid made me aware of just how limited, A, my own sense of smell is, and also how limited my use of fragrance in the garden is. However, these lilies have a fragrance that booms out across the garden. They are big, dramatic plants in every single way. It's an oriental lily called Casablanca. It is very easy to grow. It flowers for about 3 weeks in July. Now, my sense of smell might be a bit limited, but there's nothing wrong with my sense of taste. And at this time of year, my favourite food of all are summer fruits direct from the garden. But we've been sent a film by the Cansdale family in Leicester. And they are growing a summer fruit which I confess not only have I never grown, I have never even heard of.
Hi, I'm Pete.
Hi, I'm Amy.
Welcome to our garden. It's very much a family space with space for a dog and 3 children, of which Amy's my youngest, but we wanted to take a moment to show you our fruit.
In our garden, we grow gooseberries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, apples, plums, cherries, and youngberries.
This is our youngberry plant. You might not have heard of youngberries, but they're a blackberry hybrid, a bit like tayberries or loganberries. And they are absolutely amazing. Fabulous large fruits, completely delicious. They make the best jam, they freeze brilliantly as well as being lovely fresh.
One of the reasons that this youngberry plant is so special to us is because my great-grandpa had the original plants, and babies from that plant has passed down to us. Here are the youngberries that we have picked today.
So I'd really like to encourage you, if you possibly can, find a bit of space and grow something like a youngberry in your garden. You'll probably struggle to find a youngberry in the shops, but a blackberry, a tayberry, a loganberry, something like that would be equally good. They're very easy to grow. We've got them against a north-facing fence there. They're not fussy. All you need to remember is that they fruit on last year's growth. So at the end of this season, we'll cut away everything here that's fruited, and then we'll tie in this year's growth, and that will give us more delicious fruits next year.
It's great to see Amy and Holly enjoying fruits. I remember when I was their age, we used to go blackberrying. And blackberries were something that you couldn't or didn't grow in the garden, really. They were always just out in the hedgerows. Now, of course, I always grow carrots, but there's always an element of variability about carrots. And this year is a good example because carrots can be rather fickle about germinating. It's not at all unusual, this. So we have one variety, which are called mixed colours, which are absolutely fine. And then the next row has got very patchy germination, and the plants are much smaller, and the rest of the bed is practically empty. If you find that your carrots have germinated erratically, don't worry. It's not too late to sow some more. Now, if I ease one out, right, that's bright yellow. This is part of the mixed colours. The smell is immediately overwhelming. And that will have a flavour that is as good as its fragrance. But this is the bed that I'm concerned with, because I was growing here my first early potatoes, and it's now clear. So I want to use the space immediately and grow the next crop, which is thinking about Christmas, because this is a red cabbage. It's a variety called drumhead. These are young at the moment, and they're only just ready for planting out, but if I get them in the ground, they can get established. And they will not be ready for harvesting until beginning of November, really. Very easy to grow, very, very hardy. And when you plant them, space at least 18 inches apart, pop them in the ground and firm them well. When you've got a crop like this, either mulch them with an inch or so of compost, or before planting, just spread some compost and very lightly work it in, just the top inch or two. That's all they need. And the major problem that you're dealing with are cabbage white butterflies, which already have smelt the mustard smell you get in all brassicas and are attracted to them like magnets. And it's not the butterfly, of course, that does the damage, it's the caterpillars. The eggs are laid, they hatch out, and they munch their way through the host crop. And there are two ways of dealing with that organically. The first is to try and stop the butterfly laying the eggs. And the way I do that is by putting a net over them. I upturn a pot on top of the cane, and that stops the net slipping down over it and keeps it all in place. And also you can keep it nice and taut so birds don't get tangled in it. Otherwise, you just have to check them practically daily and pick the caterpillars off by hand. And they will go on laying their eggs right through into September and keep hatching out. So I'm afraid it's just a job you cannot avoid dealing with. Now, Frances spent much of last year visiting allotments all over the land. And on her travels, she went to the Isle of Man to visit an allotment where the harvest was much more glamorous and refined than just to see allotmenteers use their plots to grow a range of plants that can stretch from food across to beauty and health. And in the end, it is all about the same thing, that of growing plants that nourish you and make you look and feel better. Well, plants that nourish me and which I now grow with avid fervour are chilies. I love them. Don't harvest them too soon. You can see this one has still got touches of green on it, And that means that the flavour hasn't fully developed. And if you love chilies, it's not just for the heat, it's for that fruity flavour. But once they are ripe and reach their full colour, like these long red slims here, it's important to pick them as soon as they're ready, because a ripe chili will inhibit the ripening of unripe ones that are growing above. So if I take this and just cut it off like that, and I think this one is ripe too, so I cut there. That one is perfect. This is a beauty here. So this is now my first chili harvest of this summer, and I will eat these fresh. Now, still to come on today's programme. We have another chance to see a garden filled with the one-day wonders that are daylilies. But first we join Arit, who went to visit a garden that displays brilliantly that however big and dramatic and careful the design might be of a garden, it is always possible to work with nature rather than to impose yourself upon it.
As gardeners, the very idea of designing, redesigning, planting and replanting is something that we relish. A couple of bags of compost here and a new patio there may not seem like they could contribute to climate change. But when you examine how we garden, it's clear we have to start to think more responsibly. In our ever-changing climate, we're going to need to manage our precious natural resources. We can't go out every night using a hose pipe. That's clearly not sustainable. We need to turn our efforts into harvesting as much rainwater as we can. Our soil is also a precious commodity when you think that it takes up to 500 years for 1 centimetre of soil to naturally develop. Is it time to think about how we can make the most of the natural resources that we already have, and then whilst gardening, ensure that we have the least impact on the environment? It's a question that respected landscape architect Marion Boswell has taken to heart so much that she designs garden spaces by making choices which benefit nature and our environment. And the beautiful private garden in Kent she designed, with its permeable gravel garden, densely planted herbaceous beds and wildlife havens, demonstrates the core of her ethos, sustainable gardening, the principles of which can be applied to any garden, regardless of size. Marion, do you think us gardeners have got our approach wrong at the moment?
Gosh, but I don't think it's wrong. I think it's a question of balance. I mean, the thing to bear in mind is that we're just a little part of a huge ecosystem, and making sure that everything we do is sustainable for the very long term.
So when you come to a new space, is it garden first or client first?
Well, it's both. I mean, we work with the client and we both jointly have this other client, which is the land. And what I mean by that is just treading lightly, thinking about how we can be sustainable during the build, bringing as few resources onto the land and taking as few things off the land when we're building it. And actually, we were really pleased when we were building this. We only had 1 skip, so we managed to, to leave everything else on site.
I have to say, I'm very impressed that 1 skip left this site. So either there wasn't very much waste, or what have you done with it?
Well, we reused everything that we found. So, for example, there was some rather lovely sandstone that we found, and we've reused that to make a little retaining wall. And the same with the soil. So we took the soil that was here, took the topsoil off carefully and mounded it up, and then reused it when we were creating all of the planting beds. So we really just tried to use everything which was here.
The meadow does look beautiful, I have to say, but is it giving another function within this space?
Well, yes. The fantastic thing about the meadow is obviously it's great for biodiversity and it's a whole ecosystem, but also it's great for the soil. So by getting the roots down into the soil, particularly in a clay soil, it helps prevent runoff, it helps prevent the nutrients being washed away, and it really helps to stabilise things. There were some trees which had already been taken down, and this lovely piece, which is oak, is from a fallen piece of tree, and we really wanted to reuse what was here.
How can sustainability work its way into a smaller garden?
The absolute same things apply. I would be looking at what's there already, planting so that you're looking after the soil, and thinking about the maintenance so that there's enough maintenance to keep you healthy, but not so much as to have to use a lot of machinery and use up a lot of brought-in energy.
This sustainable approach is about more than just what you plant, but how you plant. Marion likes to use a permaculture method, which is about working together with nature and having a minimal impact on the planet.
It's all planted in layers so that we get all the predators in, as well as being able to self-support all these different plants. And that way that we have fewer pests and fewer diseases, because we cut into the box so that we allow it to have air in it, and we don't cut too hard, so that it's a bit more like as nature intended.
It looks lovely. Marion's always thinking about how she can reduce resources. In the herbaceous beds, she's packed the plants in so densely they support each other and don't need staking. She also likes to use the no-dig method, in which you only use mulch generated from waste and soil stays undisturbed to lock in carbon. I know that this border was planted with much smaller containers, which means less soil is needed. It means that that plant, whilst establishing, will also need less water. And the health of this border is not down to the use of peat or chemical fertilisers or insecticides, but just a sustainable approach that allows nature to be in balance. Marion's thinking is that we need to work with the landscape or garden we inherit so we don't spend time and money on precious resources. In this part of the garden, Marion has really read the lay of the land, because there was already a natural depression here. So what she's done is exaggerate that, made it bigger, and has used the local clay as the base of this pond area. What it's done, it means that all of the water runoff from the garden can come into here, and now there's a wonderful wildlife pond that's supporting so much biodiversity. When it overflows, this water is collected and used to irrigate the rest of the garden. While we don't all have gardens on this scale with a pond, there are things we can do to maximise our natural resources. If we homeowners collected just 1 butt of water a year, that would be over 4 billion litres of free rainfall we could take advantage of. And now I know how they managed to only have 1 skip leave site, because the clients were adamant that they didn't want any of their waste to go to waste, and they created this earthwork mound, which they call the Snow Mound, from all of that waste, and have used it just to be able to let wildflowers and escapees from the garden come and enjoy nature. If a sustainable approach means it brings us back in touch with the land and therefore in tune with natural resources, and it means that we can tread that little bit more lightly in our environment, then that can only be a very good thing.
Nellie, here, come on. I'm so glad that the whole subject of environmental sensitivity and the business of working with nature in a sustainable way is now becoming part of the common language of gardens. And it amused me to see a mound made out of waste material, because where I'm standing now, on the mound, was made entirely from the waste product from creating this garden, and it's had various incarnations. But what seems to be working really well now are these 2 beds that I made last year. Amongst it all are a few stone troughs. And this one here, the biggest of the lot, I planted a few years ago with various varieties of creeping thyme, which grow almost flush with the ground. They're designed to just cover rocks and to drip down hillsides. Last summer, this was fabulous, and the bees loved it. But now, just after it's finished flowering, is the best time to cut it back. And thyme in particular is a plant that you do need to keep compact, because otherwise it just gets leggier and leggier, and then it shades itself out and dies back completely. As long as you can see some fresh growth, you can cut it back hard, it will then grow bushier and look much better and last much longer, and for culinary purpose, give you much better supply of fresh leaves, which of course taste better. Now, we've had a film from Tony Davis near Huddersfield, where he takes this idea of inserting plants in full display into an existing border to a whole new level.
Hello and welcome to my garden in Clayton West, West Yorkshire. It's a lovely day here, even if the weather is coming a bit fast, but we'll try to keep everything under control. The problem I've got is that the border looks lovely in spring and lovely in autumn, but June and July it's just green. And whenever I try to plant anything to add some more colour, it just never gets a hold. Here's my attempt at growing Eryngium and salvias in the border, and they just can't take. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try something that I believe is called plunge planting. I'm going to dig a big hole for a pot and plant everything in that pot and get it going, and then change the pots throughout the seasons. It's like plug and play Chelsea borders. That's what I'm after. We're just about to get rained off. But these are the 2 first arrangements that I want to put in the first 2 pots. We've got lupins and Nephofia at the first one, and then these wonderful Echinacea and Ostispermums. So I'm going to get those planted up and see if I can get one in before we get completely rained off. Right, see how heavy it is to put it in? Good water to finish off. And here are the finished tubs. And with some of the old plants put back in, you really can't see the tubs, maybe just a little bit of the handles, that's all.
Come on. Go on, good girl, good girl. What a brilliant idea. You've got a plant in full flower, you can just sink it down in the ground, it can do its stuff, and then you can take it out again. That way, you keep the colour going in a way that is really difficult if everything is planted in the ground. Now, I've got a pot here which I would never dream of sinking into the ground, because I've got this for a very specific purpose. This is an alpine pan, and you can see that it's shallow and also has really masses of drainage holes. It's designed specifically for alpines that like really good drainage. Although these are small plants and have shallow roots, they hate sitting in wet compost. A plastic pot is no good for alpines. So I'm going to put crocks in the bottom, not to block the holes, but just to stop the soil running through them. The next thing is you need to mix up your own compost. But you need to start with horticultural grit. And mix it with a normal peat-free based compost. 1 part grit, 2 parts peat-free compost. And that will make any alpine feel at home. So we'll put some in the pot. Right, that's the setup. Now for the plants. I'm going to start with an Androsace, and this is Androsace lanuginosa. And you can see it's got these little white flowers that, as they age, turn a pinky, delicate shade of mauve. And the foliage is grey, glaucous and trailing, so really good for the edge of a pot. And I expect that to grow over like that. Now, a slightly more upright version is this saxifrage. Now, this is a south side seedling, and you can see it's got these white and pink flowers produced, tend to be May and June. This is flowering quite late. And so we will put that slightly closer to the middle. And rather like succulents, these are not plants that should be packed in. They should have some breathing space. They do need air and light around them. Now, I've got a beautiful pink little South African plant. This is a Rhodohypoxis, and you can see these beautiful, clear, intense pink flowers. Now we can pop that there. A tiny little campanula. This is Campanula Elizabeth Oliver. It's exquisite. This is covered in flowers about to open, so we will pop that in at the back here. Now, I want to add a house leek, a Sempervivum. And this is one that I've grown from a parent plant. And I pop this on the edge. Now, that is plenty in one pot. I will now dress that with grit to make sure that not only does it avoid any rotting around the stems, but also it looks good. It unifies it. And you don't have to use grit for this. You could use small slates, you could use stones, because what in fact you're doing is replicating the scree of a mountainside. The critical thing to keep them looking good is to let them have lots of light. And water them when you plant them, and then that will do, unless they visibly start to flop. And then in winter, ideally, they're kept outside under glass, but open at the sides. So there's plenty of air. They can freeze solid if need be, but they will not sit in a bog. Other than that, they are very robust indeed for all their delicacy and smallness. Now, from these delicate, almost doll's house plants to ones that grow tall and will flower every day, all summer long, although the actual flowers only last for one single day.
I'm Nick Pearce. My passion is Hemerocallis, or daylilies. There's a daylily for everybody, and they come from 2 inches, tiny little plants, to things about 5 foot tall. It's a hobby that's gone a bit mad. It started when I came to the Isle of Wight, and I was looking for a nice place to live, and I found this beautiful little cottage. And the fantastic thing about it was it has this marvellous great long garden. I put up a greenhouse, and I thought, well, why don't I start hybridising my own? I really had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what was good, and I was just pollinating everything without any kind of clear direction or focus. I mean, now looking back, I realise how awful they were, but that's the thing about growing anything from seed or trying to introduce a new variety, is that you have to grow hundreds to actually find one good one. I mean, it may take you like 10 years before you register your first variety, but every year thereafter, you've got a new set of seedlings coming along. So these are my daylily seed beds, basically. These are all my seedlings that I'm trialling. I'm going to see how big it's going to grow, how big the flower is, how tall the scape is, how multi-branched it is, what the foliage is like, whether it's clean, whether it grows well, whether it clumps, or whether it just stays and grows very slowly. So it's basically trialling to see whether it's garden worthy, as well as being a beautiful flower. We're on the eastern tip of the Isle of Wight, and we don't get a lot of water. And I, like so many people, have been inspired by Beth Chatto's gravel garden, and she doesn't water at all. And I thought, I'll go exactly the same way with this. This is a dry area, I can't water it. So I filled the garden with grasses and with my daylilies. The one thing they will do is tolerate drought better than any other perennial that I know. And here they are, flowering beautifully. I put loads of well-rotted manure and everything in it to try and improve the soil. But other than that, they get a good bit of muck when they go in, and then they're just left alone. And they are that tough, that good a plant. If you've got a dry, awkward position and most perennials won't survive, then stick a daylily in to just see how beautiful it looks. There's a peak season for daylilies, which is the end of June, beginning July. So at this time of the year, you go through the garden and it's just awash with flower. But actually, they flower from May to September. Each flower only lasts a day, but you'll have another 100 buds on there. So you'll have it blooming usually for about 4 to 6 weeks during the year. They can look a bit messy afterwards. It's very easy just to hack them back, just to give them a chop. And don't be afraid to, be brutal with them. One thing I've not mentioned is how bomb-proof they are. I can't put them in the compost because they'll just keep growing. They're that easy. Once you've got them, all you need to do is leave them alone. But after a few years, they'll do so well that you're going to need to divide them. And you'll have loads of plants to give to your friends, neighbours, whoever you want to. And then just put a bit of the plant back in it, it'll start all over again for you. It's an easy, beautiful plant. Everyone should have a daylily in the garden. There's a variety for everyone, there's a colour for everyone.
I do grow daylilies here and love them, but not with quite the same success as they grow on the Isle of Wight. And I think that's because we can be so wet all winter. However, we have got them. There's this lovely yellow one called Daylight, which fits in with the yellow and apricot-y theme of this part of the cottage garden. Now, actually, I've come not to celebrate the daylily, but to gather up some forget-me-not seedlings. Forget-me-nots, of course, flower in spring. Wonderful blue, hazy carpet. And then they set seed. The seeds drop to the ground, very quickly germinate, and you get a rash of little seedlings. Now, the downside of that is that you tend to just get more where you've already got some, and they spread outwards quite slowly. So what we now do every year is that we gather up trays of them, put them to one side, and then when we're ready, redistribute them around the garden so that we get a more even spread of forget-me-nots, and it works very well indeed. So here in the cutting bed, there's a little patch of seedlings, and all I have to do is just lift them as a clump, pop them in the seed tray. There we go. I have a tray of forget-me-not seedlings, which will grow just as well as they would in the ground, and these will form a nice mat of root, which I can then divide up. And sometime in the next 2 months, there's no pressing hurry, I can plant them where I want them to flower next spring. Now, we've had a film from Jessica Smith from her home near Bath, showing how she has turned her small front garden into a lovely cutting garden.
When we moved into our cottage 5 months ago, the front garden was nothing but paving slabs. I wanted our front garden to have a cottage-style garden feel, with plants spilling down the containers, various heights, lots of frothy, blousy flowers, and all that could be cut and used in flower arranging. The simplest way to create an instant, abundant garden is to use containers. And just fill them. The variance of heights and sizes and widths adds to the charm. I choose flowers for their scent, punchy colour, delicate features and foliage shape, and anything that will bring pollinators into the front garden. One of my favourite flowers is Cosmos bipinnatus sonata carmine. Its vibrant trifle pink flowers are absolute favourites of the bees, and they make a very good cutting flower. Another is Ammi majus, which floats like a delicate cow parsley in the wind with its sweet lace-like flowers. And of course my sweet peas, which have been particularly good this year. Make sure you cut your flowers the day before you arrange them, leave them in a bucket of water up to their necks, and you'll get the best out of them the next day. During these recent difficult times, the garden has been a sanctuary to me. It's been an ideal space to speak to passers-by, discuss planting tips and different varieties of flowers, and it's been a lovely way to communicate with people in the village.
Front gardens, by definition, are shared. They're yours, and you can do what you like with them, but they're shared with your neighbours, they're shared with passers-by, they're shared with local people who see them regularly. And it was lovely to see the way that Jessica so openly shared hers and clearly took great pleasure in that. Now, this is elephant garlic, and I harvested this at the end of June. It spent the last month in the greenhouse drying. And you can see that the stems now are completely dry. There's not a trace of green on them. And the roots have dried off, and yet the bulbs are still full of vitality and juice. They haven't dried out at all. So now they can be prepared for storing. Over the years, we found that they keep beautifully if you just clean them up and put them in a basket. If they're in a cool, dark place, they will store easily for 6 months and very often for up to a year. And when you clean them up, what you need to do is, first of all, cut off the stems, like that, and then take off the roots. And what you're left with is a head of garlic, which is enormous, and each individual clove of elephant garlic is as big as an average head of normal garlic. And although it's so big, it's much milder. But for everyday use, this is fantastic. So we cut that off, trim off the roots, and away we go. And I'll just work my way through the basket. But while I'm doing this, here's some jobs for you this weekend. When your lavender finishes flowering, it's a good idea to trim the flower stalks off. And this will stop energy going into seed rather than into the roots. And whilst you're about it, you can shape any plants as you will. But trim lightly, because if you cut into old wood, they often do not regenerate. To keep your containers looking as good as possible for as long as possible, it's important to give them a weekly feed until the end of summer. I use homemade comfrey or liquid seaweed, but if you can't get either, a tomato feed will do the job as well. Dilute it according to the instructions, and there's no virtue in making it too strong. And then feed weekly over and above any watering that you may do. Biennials such as foxgloves are setting seed fast. If you're going away, it's a good idea to collect some now in case they ripen in your absence. Simply cut the flowering stem and put it into an envelope. And then, when you're ready, they can be sorted out and sown. The herb garden at the moment is awash with the flowers of the marjoram. And not only does it look wonderful, it smells intoxicating and heady, and it sounds wonderful too, because every flower is being visited by a bee. There are hundreds of honeybees gorging themselves on the nectar. And that, I hope, will translate into honey that I can collect later in the year. Now, we've run out of time for today, but before we go, let me just remind you, we have loved all the films that you've sent in since we began the process in April. So please don't stop sending them. There is still lots and lots that we can all share and learn and enjoy from your garden. You'll find all the details of how to do so from our website, and I look forward to seeing them in due course. But that's it for today, I'm afraid. Nevertheless, I'll be back next week here at Longmeadow at the same time. So until then, bye-bye.